Have you ever thought about government spending on, massive defense purchases? Things like a new fleet of fighter jets or Coast Guard ships. For most countries, when a foreign company wins that contract, that money,
Yeah.
it just leaves the domestic economy to pay for the hardware.
Right, that's the common perception. But in Canada, national security spending is intentionally structured to be one of the most powerful tools of national industrial policy.
Exactly.
It's not just an expense. It's a mandatory, really structured investment back into their own economy.
Exactly. And we're doing a deep dive today into Canada's mechanism for this.
Yeah.
The Industrial and Technological Benefits Policy, or ITB.
Right.
Our mission is to really unpack how this incredibly complex and frankly successful policy works. We're going to focus on its core drivers: the mandatory economic obligations, the strategic incentives they call the value proposition, and these targeted areas known as key industrial capabilities.
And this policy is driving economic activity on a staggering scale. According to the latest ITB annual report from late 2024, there are 117 ongoing procurements tied to this.
Wow.
And that represents close to $84 billion in active economic obligations that foreign firms must fulfill in Canada.
$84 billion.
Yeah. This mandated activity is contributing over $5 billion to Canada's GDP and supporting more than 40,000 jobs every year.
That just puts the magnitude in perspective immediately. It's industrial policy with the muscle of a defense budget. So the core principle is simple. If a foreign contractor wins a contract, they are required to undertake business activity in Canada, equal to the full value of the contract they won. It's a dollar-for-dollar mandate.
That dollar-for-dollar mandate is what defines the ITB obligation. But to even understand how these massive transactions are set up, we kind of have to look at the structural framework of their defense procurement. It involves a very deliberate separation of duties across three major government roles.
Okay, let's walk through those three key players because they each control a really specific part of the process. So first up, you have the Department of National Defense, D&D, or the Canadian Coast Guard.
Right, the end user.
They're the end user. They define what Canada needs to buy, the technical requirements, the specs of the ship, the capabilities of the plane.
Then you have Public Services and Procurement Canada, PSPC. They're the contracting authority. They handle all the stakeholder engagement, the complex legal stuff, and they actually sign the contracts. They are the official buyer.
And finally, the department that's really central to this whole thing, Innovation, Science, and Economic Development Canada, ISED. It seems a bit counterintuitive that an economic development agency is managing defense contracts, but that's the whole point.
That's the secret sauce.
Yeah. ISD is structurally separated from the military and the contracting arm specifically so they can prioritize the economic and innovation requirements over the technical acquisition process.
And that separation is absolutely vital. ISD is responsible for managing the ITB policy itself. This structure ensures that national economic priorities are given, equal footing with military readiness.
Now, in terms of when this applies, we're not talking about small purchases. The ITB policy applies by default on eligible defense and Coast Guard procurements over $100 million.
Okay.
And if the procurement is between 20 and 100 million, they'll review it for possible application. So it's really embedded in the system.
And this policy isn't some overnight invention, right? It's matured over decades. It actually evolved from the Industrial and Regional Benefits Policy, or IRB, which was introduced way back in 1986.
And that one was simpler, wasn't it? More focused on just counting jobs.
Exactly. It was more about maximizing job numbers. It fully transformed into the current ITB policy in 2014, and that's when the focus shifted from simple jobs to a strategic innovation. And then, most importantly, they added these targeted key industrial capabilities, the KICs, in 2018. The policy is always adapting.
So no matter how a foreign contractor chooses to fulfill their $84 billion in obligations, those business activities have to meet some pretty strict criteria.
Oh, absolutely. And the most critical one is a concept called incrementality.
Okay, so what's that mean? If a company already has a plant in, say, Ontario, making parts for their commercial airline business, they can't just slap a new label on that work and call it part of their defense contract obligation.
You've got it. Incrementality means the work done in Canada has to represent genuinely new work or new investment that's specifically triggered by that defense procurement.
Oh, I see.
This is how ISD prevents companies from just, shuffling the deck chairs or claiming credit for business they were already doing. They were trying to shut down those simple subcontracting deals that just shift existing jobs around.
So if the core ITB mandate is a dollar-for-dollar obligation to generate new economic activity, how does ISD guide these huge foreign contractors toward the right kind of economic activity? The stuff that really aligns with Canada's national goals.
That is the key question. And they do it using something called the value proposition, or VP.
The value proposition.
The value proposition is their market-sensitive approach. If the overall ITB is the mandatory dollar amount, the VP is the scorecard used to decide who actually wins the contract in the first place. It's a weighted and rated economic element scored right alongside the technical specs and the cost.
So a contractor bidding on a multi-billion-dollar project isn't just evaluated on having the fastest jet, but on the precise economic value and strategic investment they promise to inject back into Canada.
Yes, exactly. It becomes a competitive advantage to promise better, more targeted economic benefits. The value proposition focuses on 5 distinct pillars of activity. These are the areas where ISTD really targets its criteria to maximize long-term strategic gain.
Let's break those 5 down. The first one seems pretty straightforward. Work in the Canadian defense industry.
Right. Support sustainability, growth in that sector. They want firms to leave more behind than just the product.
The second is Canadian supplier development. This isn't just a quick subcontract. It's about the long-term growth of suppliers, and especially targeting small and medium businesses, SMBs, across all regions.
The third pillar is research and development, or R&D. This is crucial. It directly enhances innovation through R&D performed in Canada, and often it links foreign firms with Canadian universities and research labs.
Fourth is exports. The policy wants to increase the export potential of Canadian-based firms. So if a foreign contractor uses a Canadian supplier and then helps that supplier sell its product globally, that's a huge win.
A massive win. And the last one is skills development and training. This focuses on filling skills gaps, supporting a future-proof workforce that can handle the new technology. It ensures the benefit includes human capital.
So within that value proposition scorecard, this is where we find those key industrial capabilities, the KICs. This is kind of like LSD's industrial wish list, right?
That's a perfect way to put it. If the value proposition is the overall economic scorecard, the KICs are the specific areas where you get, let's say, bonus points. KICs are targeted industrial areas. They're either emerging tech that Canada wants to grow or established strengths Canada needs to maintain. And investment in these KICs gets significant preference, a higher score within that competition.
And when you look at the scope of these KICs, it's clear they're designed to foster capabilities in dual-use sectors. Tech that serves both defense and commercial needs.
Oh, absolutely. In the emerging technologies category, you see the future of the global economy. Cyber resilience, advanced materials, autonomous technologies, AI, space systems, and clean technology.
So they're using the defense budget to jumpstart Canada's expertise in these non-defense fields.
That's the strategy. Then you have the leading competencies and critical industrial services category. This covers the foundational stuff: shipbuilding, defense systems integration, in-service support, training, and simulation. This list is basically Canada's national industrial strategy, and it's being driven by defense dollars.
So when contractors eventually fulfill that $84 billion obligation, they do it through specific business activities or transactions. And I see these are categorized as either direct or indirect.
That's right. Direct transactions are pretty intuitive. They're directly related to the equipment being bought. Think, production of drive sprockets for a new tank fleet or engine maintenance on a military transport plane.
Tied directly to the hardware.
Yep. And then you have indirect transactions, which offer a lot of strategic flexibility. These are investments in other areas that still fulfill the dollar obligation, but they aren't tied to the specific item being purchased.
Like what?
For example, a firm might invest heavily in R&D for small satellite technology or do supply chain work on commercial airplanes in Canada, even if their main contract was for, say, Coast Guard cutters.
That flexibility is key. But for the government to track all this, every single one of those transactions must be audited, right? And I see compliance is measured through something called Canadian Content Value, or CCV.
Yes, CCV is the metric that determines the true economic benefit. It's the portion of a transaction's value, in Canadian dollars, that includes verifiable Canadian costs. It's ISD's way of calculating any economic leakage.
So let's be specific. What counts? Because this is where the rigor is. It includes things like wages paid to Canadians, the value of parts that come from Canada, rent paid in Canada, and profit that's taxable in Canada.
Anything that directly benefits the Canadian economy. And just as important is what doesn't count. It excludes any parts imported into Canada, wages or royalties paid to non-Canadians, and administrative stuff like bid prep costs or lobbyist fees. They have to make sure the value stays local.
Okay, let's use the example from the source material to make the math clear. A foreign firm undertakes a transaction valued at $4 million. If an audit finds the Canadian content value is 80%, then the credited value towards their ITB obligation is $3.2 million.
Exactly. That metric-driven approach ensures accountability. But this leads to a critical question. If every dollar is just worth $1, how does ISED push a firm to choose a really high-risk investment in, say, AI research over a simple, safe maintenance contract?
Right. That's where the policy really becomes a steering wheel for national innovation. ISD uses these incredible incentives called multipliers.
And they dramatically increase the credited value of strategically important activities. They're basically awarding bonus credit. For example, R&D done with a university or a public research lab gets a hefty 5x multiplier.
So $1 million investment gets you $5 million in credit.
You got it. If a firm spends $1 million on a university partnership, they get $5 million credited toward their ITB obligation.
Wow. But the biggest incentive is directed at domestic startups, isn't it?
It is. If a foreign firm provides cash R&D investments into small and medium businesses, SMBs, under their investment framework, they can get a massive 9x multiplier, a 9x multiplier.
9 times. That's incredible.
The logic is brilliant. Foreign firms are being paid 9-to-1 in credit to take a high risk on small, unproven Canadian companies. They're leveraging the defense budget to provide crucial early-stage capital to innovators.
And these multipliers aren't just about tech. They're also used for human resource development.
That's right. Contributions to skills development and training for Indigenous peoples can also receive a 5x multiplier. These are all very conscious policy choices designed to shape the economy, not just buy hardware.
With such huge obligations and incentives, it's easy for the big multinational contractors to participate. But what about the small, local Canadian companies, the SMBs? How do they get a piece of that $84 billion pie?
Well, ISD has specific, really powerful tools targeted precisely at those small and medium businesses, which they define as companies with fewer than 250 employees.
Okay.
First, there's a mandatory quota. Bidders must carry out a minimum of 15% of the total contract value and work activities directly with SMBs.
So that sets a hard floor. But there's a second tool, right? The CCV boost. Tell us about that, because this seems like a huge incentive for prime contractors to work locally.
It is. For transactions with an SMD valued at $1 million or less, if that transaction already has at least 70% Canadian content value, it's automatically deemed to have 100% CCV for reporting.
So the prime contractor doesn't have to audit every single little part for that small transaction.
Yeah.
They just get full credit.
Exactly. It makes sourcing from a small local supplier highly attractive and administratively much simpler. So they're making it easier for the prime to hit their mandatory 15% quota, which directly benefits the SMBs.
That's a clever mechanism.
There's one more essential feature, the ITB banking feature. This provides crucial risk reduction for the foreign firms who are bidding on these massive long-term projects.
Banking sounds like accruing credit. How does that work?
It allows potential contractors to proactively undertake eligible business activities in Canada before a contract is even awarded. They can bank those credits for up to 10 years to use on future ITB obligations.
So it's a way to get a head start, but there's a limit, I assume. You can't just bank your whole obligation ahead of time.
You're right, there's a limit. Banked activities can only meet up to 50% of an overall ITB obligation. The other half must be new incremental activity after the contract is signed. It maintains that core policy of driving new investment.
Now, for any Canadian business listening, whether you're an SMB or a university research lab, tapping into this ecosystem is key. The source material gives some pretty practical steps.
First, you have to understand the policy and identify the key industrial capabilities that are relevant to what you do, which we've hopefully helped outline today.
Second, identify the major prime contractors in your field, the big companies bidding on or winning these contracts, and figure out where you fit in their supply chain.
Third, and this is your key competitive advantage, you have to determine the Canadian content value, the CCV, of your product or service. If you can confidently say you're a 90% or 100% CCV product, you become instantly more attractive to a prime contractor.
And finally, don't go it alone. Engage your regional development agency, or RDA. These agencies are explicitly tasked with connecting local companies with the big prime contractors. They're like matchmakers.
So to synthesize all this, the ITB policy it's not just a set of economic offsets. It's a sophisticated, metric-driven effort that's been informed by over 40 years of policy development. It ensures that when Canada spends billions on national security, that spending is also driving measurable economic activity and strategically targeted innovation.
It really sounds like the Canadian government is successfully leveraging its role as a massive strategic customer. I mean, they're the only customer for a frigate to force private sector investment into areas it deems nationally critical, like AI and clean tech.
And this raises an important question for you to mull over. The ITB policy really transforms military acquisition into industrial policy. So when a country's national security priorities like needing advanced drones or cyber resilience become the single biggest investment driver for its domestic commercial sectors, how much does that fundamentally reshape the direction of the national economy? How far should defense spending really stretch to shape the non-defense national economy?